Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. Today is going to be an interesting day because we are going to explore uh, yet another one of my travel series to historic places. And this historic place has a lot of relevancy, much like the video I did for the Holocaust Museum here in Texas. This particular video is going to deal with the John F. Kennedy assassination and my visit to the Book Depository, which is now known as the Sixth Floor Museum. This was a unique trip I got to take. One of the many things I had on my bucket list since I was a young high school kid who absolutely loved history. And I hope you guys will enjoy the trip with me as I walk through what the museum taught me and my thoughts about what happened on that fateful day. Now, just a disclaimer, the museum is a public space. I was limited with what I could take pictures of and video, partly because there was some artwork they didn't want damaged by flashes, which the light will hurt the certain artwork. Also, they did ask that we be respectful to others. It was kind of a mournful place. Now, the location is on Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. Dallas is one of my frequent haunts and a really cool city to visit if you ever get the chance. So, what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about what happened on the day that JFK was killed. So, first, I'll start with what the place looks like. So, Dealey Plaza is actually shaped like a heart almost. If you're looking down at it, it's two roads, one going up, one coming down, and they form almost like a heart or a funnel shape. The book depository is on the upper left corner if you're looking at it from where the two roads intersect. So when you get there, the first thing you have to do is actually wait in a long line, which does move really quickly. I would recommend if you make this trip, check the weather in advance because you could wind up standing outside. And two, check the temperature because it was kind of warm that day, although it was nowhere near as hot as what it's been in Texas here in, this year. So you get in line and you do have to sign in and pay your little admission fee. Not a big deal. You will go through some checks and security because obviously there's always bad players, so they have to take some precautions. Um, you are limited in what you can bring with you. People did bring backpacks, but they will take a look in your bag. And again, that's just because we have bad players in certain places. So after that, you will go into the actual elevator that was the freight elevator for the book depository. Now, back in the day, again, this was in the 1960s, the book depository was where bulk books, excess books, or newly ordered books for the state would all go to this building and then be dispensed and distributed from there, hence the name Book Depository. It was on the day of the assassination that Lee Harvey Oswald, allegedly alone, and I'll get into that in a minute, got on the sixth floor and proceeded to create an emplacement and shot and subsequently killed John F. Kennedy, as well as injuring the governor of Texas of the time. Now, the actual tour itself is called John F. Kennedy and the Memory of a Nation. It says on November 22nd, 1963, the Texas School Book Depository building was the focus of world shock, grief, and outrage when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dealey Plaza. Evidence was found that shots were fired from this floor, that would be the sixth floor. 26 years later, JFK and the Memory of a Nation, the display opened on President's Day, February 20th, 1989. This exhibit recreates the social and political context of the early 1960s, chronicles the assassination and its aftermath, and recognizes Kennedy's impact on contemporary culture. Now, I will stop here and just let you know that the 1960s were very tumultuous, as many of you who do study history know. But what shocked me was the parallels between what was happening then and what we're seeing now. Regardless of where you land politically, it's interesting how history repeats itself and does go in cycles. Now, they do have an amazing bronze statue with the dedication as you enter the building. And then you proceed to start seeing photographs of JFK. So JFK was campaigning for his subsequent election and happened to stop in Dealey Plaza or in Dallas to campaign there. At the time, the vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was a Texan. He was a native Texan and was the running mate for John F. Kennedy. So you could see throughout the photos that JFK was in public. He had security. You could see the Secret Service near him. But for the most part, he was just wading into the crowd, shaking hands. Now, John F. Kennedy was a war hero. He was injured in the Pacific. He was a Navy officer, was in combat. His famous PT boat, a patrol torpedo boat, PT 109, accomplished a variety of missions, was then rammed and destroyed by a Japanese destroyer, and they spent days in the ocean. He had a fractured back, and he tried to rescue several of his crewmen, and when they returned, they were all declared war heroes. Fast forward 20 years later after the war, and JFK was elected president. It did say John F. Kennedy announced his bid for president on the second day of the new decade. For the next 3 years, his programs and style dominated the American scene. It changed from the stable traditionalism of the Eisenhower era to the radical changes that followed Kennedy's death. Now, Kennedy was considered a progressive, but back then, a progressive or a liberal was very different than what we would look at them today. He was someone who was trying to create fairness in the law, but also he also believed, interestingly, he was very idealistic, and they even mentioned that he created a lot of programs to get youth involved in sports, youth involved in government and programs. They were not uniformly popular, but he also mentioned that, or in some of the plaques, they mentioned that stopping communism and fighting communism and corruption were very high on his list. It also notes that shortly before his death, 60% of the country supported most of his policies. He also mentioned it also mentions that in several places Kennedy actually cut taxes as opposed to increase them. He was trying to keep the deficit as well as spending in a type of mode where everything kind of balanced out. But he was not a pure balanced budget guy like Eisenhower was before. Now, that's very interesting to me because right now we're dealing with massive debt, massive inflation. I'm recording this in 2023. So to hear that is kind of cool because it was almost as if he was a mix of different presidents we would look at today. As you continue through the display, they show how Jackie O, who is his wife, Jacqueline Onassis Kennedy, um, how she set trends in fashion and set trends as a mother and a professional. The family was very much loved. A lot of people referred to it as Camelot. Now, it does go into, then it starts going into what was going on at the time. During Kennedy, I'll read this to you, during Kennedy's presidency, the nation's economy flourished. Economist Walter Heller, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, favored induced federal deficits at a time of economic growth to overcome high unemployment, a radical departure from the balanced budget philosophy of previous administrations. The deficit was only $8 billion in 1963. But this is where that deficit spending started occurring. The administration moved against the threat of recession in 1961, sounds familiar, by introducing the first major minimum wage law. In 1962, the Trade Expansion Act was designed to boost exports and aid the economy. Some people said he was anti-business. Others say he actually did help businesses by increasing trade. So wherever you fall on that historical timeline, it's interesting to hear that at that time they were fighting budgets and deficits, inflation, and businesses were being hurt. However, his brother, Bobby Kennedy, aka Robert Kennedy, was a leader on crime. Now, the irony is their grandpa and their dad, Joe Kennedy, were actually tied with the old Irish mob. So this left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. Uh, Many people speculate that the Teamsters, the mafia, or other organized crime had a desire to see the Kennedys not maintain power in the White House. Of course, during that time, we also had what they call the Red Threat, or the threat of communism. And during Kennedy's presidency, he made a point of fighting communism wherever he could. The Soviets' launching of Sputnik, I'm reading this from one of the tablets, launching of Sputnik 1 in October 1957 placed the Russians ahead in space, and the administration feared communist threats in Cuba, Berlin, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. The Kennedy administration, committed to halt the global spread of communism, promoted the largest peacetime defense buildup in history, which is funny because his party is known now for kind of not being pro defense, but the truth of the matter is both parties have their hand in that. If you look back over history, they kind of changed positions. Kennedy did approve the abortive CIA backed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, and also in 1962, the president successfully forced the Soviets to remove missiles from Cuba, which we all know as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So a lot of instability, a lot of fighting indirectly, proxy wars with, guess who? Russia and China. Again, history coming full circle. I just find these parallels blew my mind. And at the time, it was fascinating when I went through this place, but when I looked at these photos more recently, right? It's been a while since I've been there. To make this video today, these parallels absolutely floored me. Um, as you continue to go through, they also touch on problems in Europe, right? Berlin, Germany was split east and west, and Berlin was split. Also, Southeast Asia. We were having conflict situations at the time with North Korea and Vietnam. So again, that's these same hotspots are coming up today, but they've moved from Berlin and Germany to the Ukraine, and from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and North Korea, it now has gone closer to China. And ironically, Vietnam, which has become one whole communist country, is actually becoming a lucrative trading partner with the US and Malaysia. So interesting, again, how the boundaries and alliances move, but the hotspots almost are identical to what they were in the 1960s. So you think about it, 1962 to 2022, that's almost 60 years. That's a massive amount of time to go by and see these battles and these problems still occurring. Of course, there was some fun photos. For instance, there's one picture of Kennedy supporters flying the Texas flag and a Confederate flag, which today would be unheard of. But at the time, that's what was done. And just funny, looking at the clothing and the hairdos, it kind of a little bit of the 70s show, you know, Red Foreman and Kitty, which is this would have been their generation. So it goes through a lot of articles in that museum. They also talk about uh, people arguing about tickets. The president denies economic drains. Uh, Plea for space play kicks off the JFK tour. Reading those local, at that time, headlines was just very cool. Of course, you continue through and you see pictures. Now, I will point out one interesting thing is that Kennedy was driving a convertible. Now, Secret Service and his protective detail actually wanted to close the cover and just have him wave out the window. Had he done that, he probably would have lived to finish his term, because Lee Harvey Oswald would have been trying to hit him through a window or through the roof of a convertible. But instead, he wanted the top down so the people could see him, so he could rally the community. And sadly, that made him accessible to Harvey Oswald shot and anyone else who might have been doing stuff. So you go through a slew of pictures, and then they finally get to the Zapruder film, which actually was filming as the shots were fired. Now, it does go through and it says, and I'm going to zoom it here for myself, and you guys will be able to see it at 12:30. The Zapruder film frame 160 take President Kennedy waving to the crowd. At 12:30 p.m., frame 161. 1.25 seconds later, the limousine moved toward the intersection, and then it goes frame by frame showing when it was that the president was actually shot. And then it shows pictures of them zooming off. Now, the funny thing is, if you look from the base of the hill, because the two roads come down a hill, looking up, it looks almost the same. The only difference is the big Hertz rent-a-car sign is gone, and there's something else there. The fact that it's so well preserved and much the same as it was that day was very cool. They also have pictures of the motorcade trying to escape. Uh, the Secret Service now with M16s, the old style M16A2s, uh, in the convertible behind the president, zooming off after him, police cars chasing people off the way. One plaque says, after shots rang out, the limousine sped 4 miles to Parkland Hospital, one of the leading trauma centers in the nation. It arrived at 12:36 p.m., passing the Trade Martin route. Uh, Experienced trauma teams took the injured president and governor to trauma rooms 1 and 2 for security reasons. President Johnson was separated and put in a separate medical facility for observation. He was not hurt, but they wanted to separate them in case there was a plot. Over a dozen doctors worked to revive the president and failed. I'll let you guys read this. You probably may have to go back and pause and read it better. But at the time, in 1963, the presidential assassination was not a federal crime. Therefore, the murder legally fell to Texas law and to the Dallas coroner and Dallas district attorney. Um, Fearing a conspiracy that included the new president as a target, Johnson refused to leave Dallas without Mrs. Kennedy, but Mrs. Kennedy would not leave without her husband's body. So local authorities said, we have to do an autopsy. And this is where the conspiracy hat can get put on. They said, we must do an autopsy. For whatever reason, LBJ insisted that Mrs. Kennedy be with him when he gets sworn in. The official story is that having the widow with the new president showed support. Others kind of question it as an excuse to remove Kennedy's body from the coroner. But ultimately, if you read, when local authorities stood firm on doing an autopsy, Secret Service men and Kennedy staffers forcibly removed Kennedy's remains from the morgue in the inspection area and took the dead president and Mrs. Kennedy into Air Force One so she could stand by LBJ. And I find that really bizarre. Because if JFK was dead, LBJ needed to be secured, right? He needed to be away. We didn't know what was going on. Why insist that she be there? Did he want her there to show, you know, a united front to the country? Or was he using her as an excuse to remove the body so it would not be fully inspected? So now, again, LBJ wanted to aggressively pursue the war in Vietnam. There are various stories that Kennedy was not a fan of a fight like that, and that there are even rumors that Kennedy wanted to disband certain intelligence agencies. LBJ was not on board. So now you have conspiracy too. So you have the mafia and the crime families. Now you have LBJ and special interests. Or was it the communists? Who knows? Of course, they wouldn't be able to do it a full movie and a full museum display without the grassy knoll, and they have an entire section dedicated to what different people saw. As shot rang out, some of the witnesses who stood in Dealey Plaza near presidential limousine thought they were in the line of fire. I'm reading. They believe gunfire had come from the grassy knoll. There were several who believed that. Some witnesses say they saw a puff of smoke in the trees there. One witness observed unfamiliar vehicles and two men standing behind the fence. But when police went there were just some cigarettes. At the time, they didn't have DNA, so it could have been anyone. Of course, they have pictures. They recreated the way the boxes were set up. the window where Lee Harvey Oswald fired a shot. Now they did plexiglass off that corner of the building, so you can't go there and mess with the windows. But I was able to move to the adjacent window and take a picture. And I will tell you right now, the picture does it no justice. That was not a very big distance between where I was standing at that next window and the X's where each shot impacted the president's car. The official statement was the furthest shot was 273 feet. It was under 100 yards. My personal thought, that first shot, and I didn't get a good reading on what that particular distance was, could not have been 100 something feet. Somebody with a rifle with no scope and good vision could have hit the president at that distance. So a guy with a scope who was in the Marine Corps for years could more than definitely have done it. As a matter of fact, I was able to get a picture of some teenagers who were running. They had marked X on the road where the shots impacted the president's car, and there were teenagers running into the street to take pictures up at the building. And one of them almost got hit, which then you would have put another X, I guess, for a stupid kid dead on the highway. But I digress. In any case, the distance, just being able to physically look at that distance, the way they talk about it on TV through my childhood and through my younger years, and having physically stood there, not 8 feet from where Lee Harvey Oswald took the shot and looked down at that road where the president was, he was right on top of the man. I will tell you that right now. So in my mind, there's no doubt Lee Harvey Oswald could have hit the president multiple times. But all the other stuff is definitely sus. And then it goes on to say, for 4 days, the world followed the news. Only 45 minutes after the shots rang out, patrolman J.D. Tippit was murdered. That's while Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly was trying to escape. And it just turned out the day of the assassination, the nation was on red alert, and half of the cabinet was in a plane en route to Japan for an economic conference. So most of the administration was not there. The president was dead, and it was the spring, so Congress was probably in D.C. or doing whatever they were doing. But the new president was sworn in with a good majority of the cabinet, and the secretaries of state and defense, etc., were not in the country. They were in other places. Just saying. And then 47 hours after the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald gets shot by Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner who allegedly did it because he was upset they killed Kennedy. But there's all sorts of speculation as why he would do that. They go on to talk about the murder of Officer Tippit. They do provide, it's not the original rifle, but it is a Carcano Italian rifle, a 6.5 millimeter rifle, and he put a Japanese war scope from World War II on this World War I Italian rifle. But when it was recreated, the FBI and police were able to shoot that many shots accurately, that fast, from the distance that Lee Harvey Oswald did. So it's completely viable. The question is, did all of the shots actually hit the president? Did someone else shoot at him? We'll never know. Multiple congressional hearings were done, and as you all know, in 2021 and 2022, a Freedom of Information Act movement passed, and people were trying to get the JFK files unredacted, and half of them were held back anyway. So in any case, Jack Ruby wound up dying in prison. So people say he was paying off a debt to the mafia by doing this. He was a self-sacrifice. But this is one of the pictures that bothered me the most. Is there an Air Force One, and there's LBJ swearing in an airplane or wherever the hell he is, and there's the widow of the man that was killed not 40 minutes before. Now, I know you have to swear in the new president ASAP. Why bring the widow? Let her mourn. To me, this was super sus. Like, this bugged the hell out of me. In any case, as you continue through the museum, you get to see JFK's officer's sword and various medals he was awarded. They also have pictures of the actual funeral where he was held in state. Uh, there were multiple commissions. November 29th, uh, President Johnson, now President Johnson, had Chief Justice Earl Warren create the Warren Commission to discuss the findings of what happened. They determined Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, but then other information came public. People didn't buy it, so another commission was created in 1975 that concluded that it was distinctly possible there were more than one individual involved. At the end of the day, we may never know, but we all have our suspicions. I just thought it was really interesting. They do provide diagrams of the impacts of the bullets and whatnot, as well as the Clark panels, which was the doctor who his sketches of the president's body and where the impacts were. And supposedly, in some of these original documents, they report a bullet wound from the back with a large exit wound in the front, but then a small entrance wound in the front a small wound in the front that they could not explain. But then they took the president's body, so the autopsy folks never got to conclusively look at that. So who knows? Now they did provide a model of Dealey Plaza, which I'm showing in this video as well. And at the time they couldn't use 3D modeling. They didn't have a computer that could do that. So they literally had architects make a 3D model in about a week's time of Dealey Plaza, and they actually have the original model on display. I couldn't use a flash. They said no flash photography because it would actually harm the model, but the lighting was more than sufficient, so I got a really good picture. I got to stand basically right where the shots were fired. And if you think about it, you know, the car was moving very slowly, so that guy, he got a couple of shots off at a very slow moving target. Of course, they also discussed the Zapruder film and some audio film that was taken. Um, you know, which frames showed the president shot, which frames didn't. Just being able to see that kind of stuff is interesting. And then as you continue on in the museum, then you get this one article, and it changes the whole dynamic of what you're watching, because it's an article from the National General Release, which was like some kind of public paper, but it says, in the 3-year period which followed the murder of President Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, 18 material witnesses died. 18. 6 by gunfire, 3 in motor accidents, 2 by suicide, 1 from a cut throat, 1 from a karate chop to the neck. I don't know what that means, but apparently he got in a fight and got struck and killed. 3 from heart attacks and 2 from natural causes. An actuary engaged by the London Sunday Times concluded that on November 22nd, 1963, the odds against these witnesses all being dead by February of 1967, within 4 years, or 3 years, were 100,000 trillion to 1. So this reporter put out this article and actually got an actuary, like an analyst, an insurance analyst, to say what are the probability that all 18 of these people who witnessed what happened up close in that period of time would all be dead by 1967 in a 3.5-year, 4-year period. And the analysts concluded it would be 100,000 trillion to 1. So interesting how all the people who could have said something wound up dead. And this was very poorly hidden. 6 by gunfire, 3 in vehicle accidents, 2 by suicide. Sound familiar? Sound like some other politicians we know nowadays, that people all commit suicide? I've lived quite a bit in my life. I'm not young, I'm not old and dead, but I've lived for half a century. And I will tell you, I can count the number of people I know, or in my extended circle, say +1 level of contact, that have committed suicide. Not necessarily someone in my circle, but someone in their circle. I could probably count that in one hand after 50 years of life. And they had 18 disappear in 3 years. tell me that's, again, I'm not doing this museum credit with my little spiel here, truly. They do have a actual Carcano rifle with the actual scope, but it's not the original. They actually found another Carcano rifle with another scope. I will tell those of you who like firearms, this is not a long rifle. It is probably a few inches longer than an M1 carbine or an M14. Those of you who are familiar, not an M14, a Mini 14. It is not a long barreled rifle like an M1 Garand or the old Nagants with the long barrel. This was a rather stout, short rifle, but a 6.5 millimeter. This rifle was known to be reasonably accurate, especially in an open field with an open target. So, but it was interesting just to see the type of weapon that was used. And again, I took more pictures looking down at the distance, and as you can see, it's not that far. I also went down on the ground, crossed the street, didn't get hit by the cars going over the white X, and then stood in the grass on the opposite side of the building so I could look up. And I will tell you, I probably, if I had my throwing arm from my younger days, I probably could have hit that building with a baseball from where I was standing. It was not that far. Um, this guy was right on top of that president when he started firing. And I took a few video clips that I thought were pretty cool. I thought they were interesting. And just to give people some perspective. So, yeah, folks, made you think. And what I find interesting, and I'm going to sum it up with this. Oh, and before I do, as I was meandering around Dallas, they had this big eye, which was a modern art sculpture. I have no idea what the hell the big eye is about, but there he was, a big eye, creepy, but there he is. And yeah, it was just weird. I don't know if it's a satanic symbol or it's just somebody was on drugs and decided, I'm going to make the massive sculpture of an eye. But there it is. So if you want to see something weird, while you're at Dealey Plaza, you can walk down the street, get a rum and coke in the bar, and go look at a weird eye. But I digress. In any case, folks, going back to this museum, this was absolutely awesome. I have so many more questions now that I've been there. So I've made a deal with my son-in-law that and my son that at some point all three boys are going to go back there. We're going to go together and we're going to go to the museum and see it. Now, for those of you who saw my Holocaust Museum video, the Holocaust Museum is actually only 3 blocks away from this building. As a matter of fact, if you stand on the corner of at the top of the hill, literal physical corner by the entrance of the book depository, you can look down the block and see the Holocaust Museum. So if you're ever in Dallas, you absolutely got to hit one of these two if you can't hit both of them. But folks, with that being said, interesting, the parallels, the racial disharmony, the economic problems, the battle against communism, the different people fighting for power behind the president, the people who had motives to remove a president from office, and more importantly, the very strange deaths of 18 witnesses who were considered material witnesses by local law enforcement in Texas, and they never got to finish out getting all the information because they were dying of gunshot wounds and karate chops to the neck and cut throats and suicide. People in power like to stay in power, and it's been well known throughout history that they will spill blood to stay there. But what do you and I do about it? Well, we can't do anything about it, right? But it's good to know the lessons of history. These kind of instabilities come and go over the course of history. They get more stable, people figure things out, then it gets resurgent because something sets it off. So what we're going through today, what we're going through now, post-COVID, in this recession, I mean, we're in a recession in 2023, the inflationary effect, these threats from China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and BRICS, these have happened before. Similar, not exactly the same. But there's a way through it. And I'm sure there were They used to call them bunker types, you know, people who made their little bomb shelters back in the day. There's a lot we can learn today from what people did back in the 50s and 60s, and I think it's in our best interest to take a lesson from history. And don't let stupid people erase history because they think it's offensive. Good. History should offend us at times. History should force us to think and go, wow, that was not acceptable. I'm glad I know we did that once upon a time so we don't do it again. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm going to leave these videos to you. If you have any questions, again, I should premiere this video. Sometimes I can't make my own premiere. I will answer questions below the video if you put them under the video in the comment section. Folks, until next time, thank you for joining me. God bless, Godspeed. Learn, read up, see what's happened in the past, because what happened in the past that they got through may give us solutions for the future. And if you're in Dallas, great place to go. And there's a pretty cool bar with a weird eye across the street about 4 blocks down if you get tired of walking around and seeing history. And their mozzarella sticks aren't too bad at that bar either. Anyway, guys, be good, be safe, and I'll see you on my next travel video of historical places. Take care.